In this video, I want to review a few strategies how you can support claims in scientific writing. The readings for today cover a variety of ways to do that. There's some phrase banks, some quote-unquote skeleton phrases, and I'll actually show you one of the phrase banks that I think is really great. I've added the link to it in the supplemental materials section. You're not required to look at it, but I strongly suggest you do. Actually, one of your required readings refers to it. There's a link in that reading as well, but you also have a separate link in your module under supplemental materials. So what I want to focus on here in this video is what kind of language to use to support your claims by referencing other people's work, right? That's such a basic part of scientific and academic writing, particularly for academic audiences. So let's look at a few examples from some of the articles you might find familiar because I've used them before in some of the videos. So here again from the ecology article by Fisher and Lindenmayer on landscape modification, habitat fragmentation. I want to show you here. So this comes from a later part in the paper where the authors are laying out their conceptual framework of landscape modification, right? And so their subheading, typical patterns of landscape modification. You see a lot of sources are cited here, of course, like we always see in any kind of research article. So what these authors do, and you might have noticed this before, they don't really mention the authors' names. Like according to, Sharp et al. Or Bennett or Saunders, they just write about the content and then reference, which is probably the most common way most researchers do it. Doesn't mean it's the only way, but it's the most common way, especially experienced science and academic writers do it. So let's look at this paragraph more closely. So in this paper, we are concerned with landscape modification that has occurred within the last few centuries and it has negatively affected native species diversity. Then comes a sentence that has a lot of citations. So again, the sentence here only says broadly similar patterns of this type of landscape modification have been documented around the world. So that's a very common strategy to use a verb like have been documented, have been researched, have been examined around the world. Rather than saying blah, blah, blah has examined it, it makes a general statement about this particular topic having been examined, or in this case documented, and then parentheses, for example, and it lists, in this case, 4 different articles or sources that have done that. So that's very typical. Of course, what we also see a lot is the next sentence. Typically, as landscape modification increases, more native vegetation is lost, land use intensity in modified areas increases, and remnants of native vegetation are increasingly influenced by processes originating in modified areas. So we don't really get a signal phrase like have been documented, have been examined, or something like that. It just states the facts, but it backs it up by where this information comes from. Very important. And the rest of this paragraph does the same thing. Okay, so let me show you some more examples. So here is one where the authors who are writing are actually using the name of other authors, and this comes from the article on enhancing hand washing that we looked at together, I think in module 2. So I've taken a paragraph from that particular article, and if you look, so let's look at the first sentence. We use the Rana's approach to systematic behavior change, and there comes the citation, to tailor the interventions, and so on and so on. So similar to what the previous article did, just stating what we're doing or what the authors are doing with the reference. But then a little bit later on, I want to point out this sentence to you. Thus, the intervention was tailored to the target population, as also proposed by Assad and K 2015. So this one here is also proposed by Assad and K 2015. Very common strategy if you want to highlight particular authors. Now, as I said before, I don't see this too much in published research in scientific or in science fields. where the tendency is to just state the fact and then put the citations in parentheses, maybe use signal phrases like have been documented. Rarely do I see something like according to Johnson and Smith, yada, yada, yada. That is more commonly used, I think, in novice writing and student writing, and that's okay. But when you get to the level of publication, you amass a lot more material than you do for your typical paper for a class. And if you had to list every writer and every researcher and every author you consulted in each sentence, you would never finish the manuscript. So part of the strategy to do it this way here, or to do it by not necessarily mentioning, as these authors do, as also proposed by a silent K, like they're doing right here. The reason for not doing that is you actually saving space. And when you're publishing, you only have a limited amount of words, and believe you me, you never have enough space to say everything you want to say in a journal article. So, but it happens, especially sometimes when it's about a specific method or specific methodologies. In this case, as also proposed by Assad and Kay. So these things do happen, and it's a common strategy. A typical phrase, and I've taken the next two examples from some manuscripts I've been working on with some colleagues of mine. I've been giving them some editing and proofreading and then writing feedback. So this is one sentence, and you might notice here the citations are in the AMA style, the American Medical Association, where they're numbered. And I believe that this author used a particular software. That's why you see those square brackets here. So, but those are the citations. So evidence suggests that for the first 2 to 8 years following SCI, VND rapidly declines and may be mediated by additional variables, including level of injury and sex. So this phrase here, evidence suggests that. That's a common way to phrase, to clearly indicate to your reader, like, hey, here I'm looking at other people's work. So, but you're still staying neutral in the sense that you're not saying according to Johnson and Smith and whoever and Anderson and all these different people. You're just saying evidence suggests, and then you look at the citation, you have number 1 and 33 to 41. That's a significant number of sources that this author is referencing, as in terms of, people who have suggested that for the first 2 to 8 years following SCI, BND, which is bone marrow density, rapidly declines. And SCI refers to spinal cord injury. It's an article. I think I've shown you some examples before, or if not, I will at some point. It was a very good article. Another typical phrase is, research in this area is notable for small study populations and the lack of randomized control study designs. Very general sentence. You notice there's no citation here, but then comes, for example, a single subject case study compared 3 phases, blah, 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 and here you have the citation. So there's 2 things going on. Number 1 is a general sentence, introducing this idea of research in this area is notable for whatever it is notable for. Okay, and then followed up by a for example, and then the second strategy, rather than saying the names of the authors, it just lists, or it names the type of study, a single subject case study compared. That is sometimes more useful information for the reader than saying the author's name like Anderson and Smith, because knowing that this was a single subject case study that did something in this context gives me an idea of, how valid and reliable that outcome might be. So if I have a large controlled, a large randomized control trial with, 500 participants versus 1 case study, my results will weigh differently in the eyes of scientists and academics. Okay. Another example here, the Society of Critical Care Medicine clinical practice guidelines on pain, agitation, and delirium in the ICU broadly suggests non-pharmacological management of sleep through environmental and so on and so on. So it lists the source here. But here, the author, which is an organization, is listed, the Society of Critical Care Medicine, and then what it has, these clinical practice guidelines on pain, agitation, delirium in the ICU broadly suggest. So that's another strategy I've seen lots of folks use when they have an author that's an organization. I find that writers tend to put the name of that organization within the sentence more often than necessarily the author's last names. Okay, so another strategy to highlight the author in this case, what I would call a corporate author and organizational author. So I want to finish up with just walking you briefly through this great phrase bank, University of Manchester. That's the one that is mentioned in one of your articles that you're required to read for today. But I also linked to this in your supplemental materials with a full citation. So let me click on this. Let's take a look at it together. So you have several options here on the top: introducing work, referring to sources. I'm clicking on these, so I'm going to go back to one in a second. Describing methods, reporting results, discussing findings, writing conclusions. So these give you phrase banks or phrases that are commonly used to do these things. So let's look at referring to sources. If you scroll down a little here, you'll see there is different categories. So let's click on general comments on the relevant literature. So here you see the literature on X has highlighted several different theories exist in literature regarding. More recent attention is focused on the provision of, and so on and so on. And what is nice about all of these, they stay very general. So they give you phrases, talk about research, other people's research in a way that you don't have to mention the author's specific names in your writing. Okay, so this will give you, not just for this particular topic of a module on how to support your claims, in a sense in this video I want to focus on how to use, what kind of language and phrases you could use and what strategies to use when referring to other people's research, but also in general to support your writing, support your claims. And again, I want to point out as introducing work, describing methods, reporting results, discussing findings, writing conclusions. And each of those categories has many subcategories. And right now I'm writing conclusions, sort of stating the aims of the study, summarizing main research findings. And you click on each of those and you find at least 10 plus, about 10 plus suggestions for phrases that are widely used in the literature or in science and academic literature. So check those out, and I think this is another great website to maybe bookmark in your favorite bookmarks. This is your writing, you can refer to it back and forth.